back here on Richo and Reith. And in our Canberra studio is the new Minister for Communications, Mitch Fifield. Welcome, Mitch.
Thanks very much, Graham. Peter.
Now, I know there's so much to ask you about your portfolio, but you wouldn't be too surprised if we wanted to ask you questions about the events of 2 weeks ago. We'd have to try. I mean, it's part of our job. Now, you are definitely one of the chief plotters. What everyone's trying to work out is, why the Monday? Why the Monday? Why then? Why the week of a by-election?
Well, Graham, I gave a few interviews immediately after the party room ballot to provide a bit of context to what happened, to what was a very difficult decision for all of us. My colleagues, as a collective, decided to make a change. That's a matter of record. We have a new Prime Minister. I'm not one for looking in the rearview mirror. I'm focused fairly and squarely on the task I have ahead of me as the Minister for Communications and the Arts.
It was a bit of a surprise, though, to go before the Canning election, and we've heard Tony Abbott talking about it today, how he would have won it, you know, but for going earlier. And the thing that really intrigued me was the fact that there was that tweet from Rupert Murdoch, and it's been reported too, that Tony Abbott had spoken to Rupert Murdoch, and then he blurted out the story, and the story apparently was that Tony was thinking about a post-Canning double dissolution. Yeah. And that actually would be a damn good reason to go earlier, in my view. Your turn, Mitch.
Well, yeah, I wasn't sure if that was commentary or a question, Peter. Look, I'm very happy to leave it to commentators such as yourself and people who will dissect what happened over the last few weeks in books and newspaper articles. I'll leave it for commentators to do that. As I say, I want to focus on the job that I have and the opportunities that we have as a government to convey our message to the public in a warm way, in an embracing way, in an inclusive way, to take the Australian public along with us, to explain to them what are the challenges that we face and what the solutions are that we're going to put forward. And I'm very happy for us to be judged at the next election on our performance.
Well, that's warm, embracing and inclusive. Does that mean that the Abbott government was cold, lacked the capacity to cuddle and was exclusive?
Oh, look, I think there was a capacity to cuddle and include, but look, we have a new Prime Minister. He has his own style, he has his own tone, and we just want to get on with transacting the people's business.
All right, look, let's get on to the job at hand then. I know everyone, and we will tonight, ask you about the more spectacular, sexy media reforms, but I want to start off with the NBN. Where are we on the NBN? I know that where I am in Sydney, I don't have it. When are we all going to be able to say we've got it?
Well, Graham, we're got about 1.3 million premises that now have the potential to connect to the NBN. I think it's something of the order of 600,000 people who have connected. The target date is to have the NBN fully rolled out by 2020, and by June 2018 we should have something of the order of 9 million premises that have access to the NBN. In effect, we're going to have a doubling of the NBN's footprint each year, so it's a very ambitious timetable. It's I guess a little bit like my former gig with the NDIS. That's an ambitious timetable with similar timeframes. So look, good progress is being made, and in the very near future, NBN will announce its 3-year rollout plan, so that most Australians will have a good idea as to when the NBN is going to come to their neck of the woods.
Well, when the NBN does come, what NBN is coming? Now, we had obviously Labor's grand plan. You diminished it somewhat. What am I going to get when it finally hits my door? And by the way, at the end of this question, tell me when it gets to Dover Heights in Sydney. That's the other thing I need to know.
OK, I'll take a note to have a look at Dover Heights. But look, Stephen Conroy's plan, as you know, is well documented, was framed on the back of an envelope, in effect. What we're putting forward, the good work that Malcolm Turnbull has done with the board and management of NBN will see the NBN rolled out 6 to 8 years earlier than it would have been under Stephen Conroy, and at tens of billions of dollars less cost. One of the prime differences, as you probably know, is Stephen Conroy was looking at fibre to the premises for every location. What we're pursuing is a multi-technology mix where the NBN is in effect technology agnostic. Where it makes sense to go fibre to the node, that's what the NBN will do. Where it makes sense to connect people by satellite, that's what they'll do. Where fixed wireless makes sense, that's what will happen. So the main thing in our approach is to get the NBN out to people much sooner than they would have received it under Stephen Conroy's plan.
What about speed? What about speeds? Are they going to be the same as under Conroy's plan?
Well, we're looking at between 50 and 100 megabits per second for most of the technologies. Satellite will be about 25 megabits per second, but what we're finding so far with the NBN is most people aren't accessing even up to the need for 25 megabits per second. So there is the capacity there for people to do the things that they want to do.
I think it was, I'm not sure when it was, maybe 6 weeks ago or thereabouts, the NBN and Malcolm Turnbull were talking about some of the additional costs really flowing from the reality that the thing was so badly organised to start with. There are a lot of risks in there, and some of those risks have come forward. And I was also led to believe, or understood from what was said then, that there might still be some more costs associated with this, and you've just been getting some briefings, so I was just wondering if there was any insight you could tell us on that, because the cost is a continuing problem for the government.
Well, the government's equity is capped at $29.5 billion, but obviously the NBN as a scheme will cost significantly more than that. One of the problems with having so little good foundational work done for the design of the NBN is that the initial management and board didn't really have a good idea of what costs were. In light of the experience of rolling out the NBN, the new management and board have a much better handle on what the ultimate costs will be. So they're continually improving their costings, and it's just a pity that the previous government didn't do the sort of preparatory work that they actually did with the NDIS, where they had a 2,000-page Productivity Commission report first to lay out the blueprint. So the NBN is getting much better, not only at estimating costs, but also in estimating the timeframes for rollout.
And just as looking further down the track, it might be too early, but at some stage, presumably, the government will be looking at privatising some parts of this monopoly that we've established under the auspices of the previous government.
Well, I can't predict what may be decided down the path. That's not something currently in my contemplation. What we do want to make sure, however, in the meantime, is that other wholesale providers provide their services on a level playing field. Yes, NBN does have some pretty serious monopolistic characteristics, but it's also important that where there's the opportunity for others who want to provide services, that they compete with NBN on a level playing field.
Well, can we turn now to the stuff that the papers do write about all the time, and let's look at media reform. Where are we up to on Reach, which is obviously fascinating about 6 people in Australia, but not the rest?
Well, you're right, Graham. It's something I've found moving from disabilities and aged care to the communications and media portfolio, is when I spoke about disabilities and aged care, I didn't always get much of a run, but I find now I only have to whisper, and the things I say get broad coverage. I mean, who knew that the media love to report on media more than anything else? But where we're at is we do have a regulatory environment that was designed in and for a pre-digital world. Australians, as consumers of media, are determining the way that they want to access their media, how they want to access it, where they want to access it, and that's really challenging the existing rules and laws that we have in place. Now, the current laws won't last forever. Either government will change them, or consumer choices and preferences and the technological capacity for them to access their media in different ways will render the media laws irrelevant. Look, it's appropriate that we look at the media rules, and two that are most often cited are the 75% reach rule and the 2 out of 3 rule, that you can't have more than 2 of the 3 traditional platforms in a market. Now, obviously, those particular rules don't cover things like subscription television. They don't cover online media. They don't cover local newspapers. I think we all understand what the original intent of these laws were. It was that no particular proprietor or organisation could have undue influence, particularly in terms of news. But reach doesn't relate to influence necessarily, and the 2 out of 3 rule, that relates to platforms. It doesn't relate to influence. So it's appropriate for government to take a look and to see if we can reach a consensus. I've said before, there's a difference between consensus and unanimity. You'll probably never get unanimity in this area, but I'd like to see if we can reach something approaching consensus in relation to these media laws.
See, the thing that worries me, and this is definitely not what the party that I've been a member of for the last nearly 50 years would say, but it concerns me that with the advent of the internet, and these rules were invented prior to the internet, once you've got the internet here, it just seems to make a large part of it irrelevant. Now, everyone focuses on how many people listen to Alan Jones or Ray Hadley. Truth is, more people listen to FM radio. They get up in the morning and listen to pop music where there's only a little bit of news and it's not taken very seriously. I mean, is it really relevant anymore to have a reach rule because in the end it was always about news. It was always about whether you could shape the news because of who you were. It just seems to me there's so many ways to shape the news now. How many blogs are there, political blogs at the moment, that you can get hold of? There are literally thousands of them, literally. So it just seems to me to be a complete waste of time.
Look, technology and consumer choice will ultimately overwhelm these rules. It's a little bit like the boy with his finger in the hole in the dike. How long can it last? So I'm looking forward to getting around and talking to each of the main players in media to see what they think, because you can always make assumptions about what it is that people might think given their commercial perspectives. But you sometimes are surprised when you sit down and really drill down and see what someone's bottom line is. Yeah,
but when you go drill down with the guys who are actually running these media outfits, I mean, they're interested in their interest, which can be a very different thing to the public interest. And can you tell me, though, that the government's going to be any different to previous governments, including the Howard government, where we had, a lot of time talking about anti-siphoning and all these elements that go up to the industry, but in the end, it was just too hard politically, and we didn't produce a rational outcome, quite frankly, on policy. So, it seems to me it's a tricky job you got there, Mitch.
It is. I guess something that's changed from the Howard government is the advance of technology. I don't want to describe the Howard government as being in the pre-digital age. I don't want to reflect on the Howard government. They were certainly there as part of the digital age, but things technologically have changed dramatically in the last 8 years. So it's a different environment. I'm not setting a time frame for this particular work that I'll be undertaking. I think the discussions that I have, not just with the proprietors, but also with my parliamentary colleagues, will really dictate the time frame in which I operate on this.
So do you think there will be any changes to the anti-siphoning? Because that's a big issue for the public's view?
Yeah, well, look, anti-siphoning, is a separate issue really to the other two that I've mentioned, although often they're conflated. I mean, I fully support, and the government fully supports, having nationally significant events on the list that's available for free-to-air TV. But I think something that's often not appreciated is that the laws don't mandate that free-to-airs have to purchase particular sporting events. They don't mandate, even if they do have the rights, that they've got to show them. And also, there's nothing to prevent the free-to-airs on selling all or part of the rights that they have. So I think there are a few things which aren't always understood, but the anti-siphoning list, it does certainly provide a degree of comfort and protection for the viewing public, which I think is important, and we're not proposing to alter that. But I obviously will talk about whatever the subjects are that the various media outlets want to talk to me about.
Well, I think you can be assured that Foxtel will talk to you about it. I don't think there'll be too much doubt about that. But I mean,
no doubt about that.
In
Happy
the
to
UK,
engage.
in the UK, where obviously the main sport, football as they would call it, soccer as we would, migrated entirely. The Premier League migrated entirely to subscription television. I mean, it can't happen here, can it?
Well, I'm not even.
Not if you want to keep your job. Not if you want to keep your job.
Particularly in grand final week, Graham. So look, I know the AFR got a little excited earlier in the week in relation to anti-siphoning, but look. It'll come up in discussions, but I appreciate the importance of the list. Yes, there are from time to time particular events that come onto and go off the list, but I think Australians they like to know that they can have access through free-to-air to the events they love the most.
Now, I've always been one opposed to censorship, but it seems to me there are some areas in the internet where censorship would be a great idea. One obviously is terrorism and the incitement to people to do some horrible things. And the other one that has always concerned me that we seem too powerless about is cyberbullying, which can be a massive problem, particularly for our young. Is there any way that technology will ever allow us to do anything about either?
Well, I think in relation to cyberbullying, Paul Fletcher, as the former parliamentary secretary in this area, established and legislated the Children's E-Safety Commissioner, and part of the brief of Alistair McGibbon, the inaugural commissioner, is to tackle that very issue of cyberbullying and to take steps to remove people who are perpetrating those acts from the platforms that give them that capacity. Now, what he is finding is that he doesn't need to use laws or regulations in most cases. It's just a conversation with the particular platform provider in most cases that will address that particular issue. So the Children's E-Safety Commissioner only commenced work on the 1st of July, but he's doing some good things already.
Now, I've got time for one last question because we've got to leave it. But I was going to speak to you tomorrow night on Richo about the NDIS, but certain events occurred about which you will not speak 2 weeks ago, which rendered that not possible. I'm wondering where we are on the NDIS. I know it's not your responsibility now, but the big question is, as Scott Morrison sits down to make a whole lot of hard decisions, even though everybody said, and I was one of them, this was a reform whose time had come, can Australia afford it in the current circumstances?
Well, the short answer is yes, Australia can, and it has to. At full scheme, the NDIS will be a $22 billion a year operation. $10 billion of that is money that the states would have ordinarily been putting into their disability services in the absence of the NDIS. There's another $3 billion, which is the money that the Commonwealth would have put into a limited range of disability services in the absence of the NDIS, which leaves a $9 billion gap, which is the Commonwealth's new investment investment into the scheme. Now 40% of that $9 billion is covered by that 0.5% increase in the Medicare levy, which in effect leaves a $5 billion a year funding gap per year. So it's not the $22 billion, which is the number of people here. It's really $5 billion. But this is the core business of government. This is why people pay their taxes, is to provide additional support to people who face challenges for reasons beyond their control. And it's one of the reasons why it is just so important that we get the budget back into balance. Why Scott Morrison, as Treasurer, wants to get the budget back into balance is to make sure that we can do this, which really is a part of the core business of government.
All right, Mitch, we're going to have to leave it there.
Yep.
Mitch Fifield in Canberra, thank you very much for your time. I'll know who you've offended as I listen, watch and read the various parts of the media. I'll know who's got you on side and who hasn't, because I can tell you one thing, mate, you will make enemies. No matter what you do in your job, it has to happen.
That's showbiz.
Yeah.
It is indeed.
Well, you've had a good start.
It's a
Mitch.
return to
Best of
vaudeville.
luck. Best
We'll
of
see
luck.
you soon. Mitch Fifield in Canberra and Peter Ethan. I'll be back very shortly.